Hi, welcome back. And we had a slight technical glitch and we had to resume or restart our session again. And I'm very sorry and apologize for that. Inflation or growth? That is the big debate which is beginning to heat up once again. There has been talk that the government and the RBI may want to consider relaxing the 4% target that the RBI has to maintain inflation with a plus or minus 2% band on either side. But is that such a good idea? Because next year, the 5 year framework during which the 4% target was kept is due for revision. And that is what we are going to discuss with Professor Ila Patnaik today. But before we go into our discussion, I need to make an appeal. Digital news, all of us are used to reading digital news and watching digital videos free. But many of you don't know that it is a very, very capital intensive operation, especially when it is a mainstream media operation like the print does. Reading anything or watching anything for free doesn't help the organizations who invest a lot of money and effort, hire the best journalists, pay decent regular salaries at a time when the industry is really struggling to make ends meet because of the economic slowdown and the economics of the advertising industry being broken. So my request to you is, if you're paying for a lot of things online, why should you not pay for news and videos and good content, good journalism, which is unhyphenated, which is not left, which is not right? So please take a subscription to the print. You will get the link below this video, the print.in/subscription, whether you're living in India, whether you're living abroad. Take a subscription to the print and help good journalism, because you should pay for what you read and watch online, just like you pay for a newspaper or a magazine or pay a video TV subscription, TV channel subscription, whether it is Tata Sky or anything online. Hi, Ila. Welcome back to IlaNomics. And this week you've made a very, very strong, persuasive argument about why changing this 4% target band between 2 and 6 is not a good idea, because it is due for revision in the next 5 years, for the next 5 years. And this is coming at a time when this debate between inflation and growth has really caught on, and not just in India, even outside India.
I think that because these are very, very uncertain times, and this is a time, it's not a normal time to take a decision that is going to affect what we will witness in normal times, is something that is very hard. So let's just step back and ask the question, what is the inflation rate that all of you will be comfortable with? So if we think about how much will we be happier paying more next year, so will it be 6%? Because the current band, which is the target of 4% with the 2% around it, allows a 6% inflation rate. Or so will it be 6% or will it be higher? Now, India has witnessed 7 to 10% inflation in the past. And usually when we are witnessing 7 to 10% inflation, then we're often talking about price rise. Uh, that's that becomes an issue that voters talk about, consumers talk about, households, when there is unhappiness. And that is something that was the basis on which the target of 4% with the band around it was chosen. That it wasn't, why was 12% not chosen? Argentina has 12% as the rate, because in India, consumers are not happy with paying 12% more. So, if you just think about the first question, which is that though the decision, it has to be taken in 2021, whether to keep the current rate or to change it. But if it is taken at an abnormal time, and we have to think about not just this abnormal time, but for normal times to come, then I think the first question that we need to ask ourselves is, will we be happier with, say, 7%, 8%, 10%? That's the first question to ask ourselves. And I don't think we will be, and that's why I'm making this argument.
Mhm. Ila, in the last 5 years, what has this target achieved? Because even before the completion of the 5 years, now we are 6.9, closer to 7%, although this last 10 months have been extraordinary because of the pandemic and the lockdown. Because you have also written in your column today that India's range is also quite wide, and we will put the link of that column for you in the description of this video. So why do you say it's wide? Why, and what has it achieved? This targeting framework.
So if you compare it to international standards, this 2% above and below is seen in two other inflation targeting countries, Turkey and Argentina. If I'm wrong about that, and there is a country that I've missed out, then readers, please feel free to add to it. But this is broadly, among the main countries, the large countries that have inflation targeting. Uh, it's either a point inflation, that it's a rate without this band around it, or the band is narrower. So in comparison, we have a pretty wide band. In fact, a lot of the criticism that came early on was that the band was perhaps too wide. So we do have a wide enough band. This does permit us a 6% inflation. Now, if I look back at 15, 20 years of, when the RBI was trying to control price rise without actually having a formal inflation target, then that would be, the RBI would talk about a 6% growth rate with a 6% inflation rate. I mean, that was the kind of comfort level, so to say, that people were comfortable with a 6% growth rate and a 6% inflation rate. Now, here, when we start talking of a higher rate, then, it's not that we're talking about, at least the discussion in the media has been that it's not the rate that should be, say, 10%, but it should be a band which is wider. And that's why I asked the question. It's already wide enough. So how much
Mhm.
wider do you want it?
So you are very clear that there should not be a rethink on this target.
Yeah, I think that, these are abnormal times. And in these times, yes, we've seen higher inflation. And I think a lot of it has been due to disruptions, due to supply side. A lot of it is food inflation, which I expect will come down. The crop has been good, vegetable prices are coming down. So I expect that will come down. And that this is not, at least experience has not shown that India and consumers are comfortable paying more than this on account of inflation year after year. You see, you do realize that it's not that all wages are indexed, because a very small part of the working force is in the formal sector, where you do have some sort of dearness allowance or indexing of wages. A very large part of the workforce is primarily in the informal sector, and it's not that they keep getting year after year a 7% hike in wages or a 10% hike in wages. They don't. They have to negotiate. And given the weak negotiation power of the large working population that we have, you don't want to push them towards lower real incomes. And that's
Mhm.
what this sort of a thing will do. Now, let me just stop for a minute here and say, so can we get higher growth by getting higher inflation? Can we just inflate our way to growth? I mean, every country would love to do that. If all we had to do for getting higher growth was looser and looser and looser monetary policy, and just bear tolerate higher and higher levels of inflation, then we would all be partying. But I think a lot of good research in macro has shown that you might get a temporary easing of interest rates, and a temporary, uh, sometimes even a feeling that yes, you're going to get high growth, but it is not growth that is sustainable. You don't get growth by printing more money. That's the bottom line.
Ila, we are getting a lot of questions already from our viewers, and I think we should jump into those questions. And those of you who are watching, please send us your questions. We will try our best to answer them and satisfy your questions. Uh, we'll take Swastik Sharma's question first. Ila, he says, but high inflation will repel FDI. Can we afford that? If the inflation is high, FDI may be reduced,
No,
pushed back.
I'm not arguing for higher inflation. I'm arguing for the exact opposite. So I'm not saying we should have higher inflation. Higher inflation will, of course, put pressures on the currency to depreciate, which or at least create expectations of currency to depreciate and have an impact on capital flows as well, on poverty, on real incomes. I'm not arguing for higher inflation. I'm saying that we should not widen the band and we should not raise the target rate.
Yes, Chandan has a similar question. Is the 6% inflation number the sweet spot for good growth numbers to be sustainable? Should it be 6, not less than that?
So, the primary result that evidence suggests is that it is low and stable inflation that gives you higher steady state growth. So if you go above 6, is that low? I personally don't feel so, and that's what I'm arguing here, that I think even the 4% inflation rate with the band that we have is good enough, and that we should not be making it 6 plus minus 2. So the target rate should not be raised, because I don't think it's going to give us higher growth. In fact, what you see, if you look back, is that whenever we had periods of high inflation, India actually got lower growth rather than higher growth. Why does that happen? That happens because higher inflation induces more uncertainty. Businesses do not know what the prices of their inputs and outputs will be, and therefore that leads to lower investment. It Higher and volatile inflation worsens the investment climate, and that is why what is preferred is low and stable. Now, I would say 4 if you can achieve it, 5, uh, you know if that's possible, but beyond 6 I start thinking that people become uncomfortable.
Mhm. Ayushi Paliwal also has a related question on growth and inflation and disposable incomes. Ayushi says disposable incomes are going to be down next year. So curbing inflation, won't it hurt an average consumer?
I'm sorry, there was an aeroplane going.
I'm
Can you
sorry.
repeat?
I'll repeat that for you, Ila. That's okay. Ayushi Paliwal says disposable incomes are going to go down next year. So won't curbing inflation hurt an average consumer?
Disposable incomes are going to go down, so you should curb
Yeah,
inflations even more, not
that's
less.
exactly what I thought.
Yeah, not less. So, if your speed, so are you talking of nominal disposable income or real disposable income? Let's assume you're talking of nominal disposable income. Okay. Now, if nominal disposable income is lower and if price rise is higher, so we don't curb inflation, then people have lower real disposable income. So you do want to curb inflation.
There is a slightly unrelated question, but we'll take it from Raja Mukherjee. Every government around the world, would it be in the UK or the US, are giving a pass to fiscal deficit and printing money and putting it in the hands of people. But what is the way out anyway? Because oil is stable.
See, emerging economies don't have the luxury of printing money in today's globalized world. What happens when an emerging economy starts doing that is that there is a very high expectation of high inflation, therefore, a depreciation of the currency. And in expectation of currency depreciation, capital flight starts happening. It is not just FDI, which I'm just relating it to a previous question. It is not just FDI that reduces because of expectations of a depreciated currency, but even local capital. We see capital flight out of the country when people expect a currency to depreciate. So, if you are the US, it's not the dollar that is depreciating. So you don't particularly worry about it. They have the ability to issue more currency because governments across the world, investors across the world are happy to invest in dollars. But emerging economies don't have that luxury.
There is a question from Tanmaya Sahu. Thank you, Tanmaya. Do you think, like the Feds, our RBI will keep interest rates low until 2023, Ila?
See, RBI has lowered interest rates in the last few meetings and has kept them unchanged. But my sense is that once the pandemic is over, and if inflation persists, particularly if core inflation persists, then they may start thinking about raising rates. So while the US has a lower target and lower rates, and they can both afford it, and they have had periods of long periods of low, near zero interest rates. I think for us, it would be something new and risky. So my sense is that 2023 may be stretching it a bit.
Because some of the views I have heard on some of these business channels is next year is going to be a pause. 2021 is going to be a pause. Don't expect cuts next year, but things will change after 2021 in 2022. So let's keep our fingers crossed on that. Uh, Rahul Dara has an interesting question, Ila. He says, how can an economy have inflation in a recessionary cycle? We are going through a recession, even if it's a technical recession. Shouldn't prices actually come down?
So this is the irony. This is the puzzle of stagflation. That when you think about inflation, which is demand-led inflation, you should not be expecting low growth and high inflation, because if growth is low, then you don't have high demand. So what is pulling up prices? I think there's a lot of literature on stagflation. It is not always well understood that why is it that we have stagflation in an economy. Stagflation is high inflation with low growth, with stagnation, so low growth. Now, in the present circumstances, I think most of what the Monetary Policy Committee meeting members are saying, what RBI governor has also said, is that a lot of the price rise has been linked to supply disruptions due to the pandemic. If after the pandemic is over and things are back to normal, they continue, then we'll have to rethink about why we are facing this sort of a stagflation. Particularly think about low growth at the moment. It's not even low growth, it's a contraction. And that's because there's a mechanical issue. If you can't move out of your houses, you can't go and sell things. If people are not going out to restaurants, if they're not going out for holidays, for trips, then certainly the hospitality sector or the hotels or a lot of manufacturing will suffer because that activity is not taking place. So the kind of stagflation that we're facing now is actually very, very different from anything that we've seen, at least anything we've seen since the 1950s in India, or in fact, what we've seen in most countries abroad as well. So this is a different kind of stagflation.
Deepak Oja is asking us, Ila, is the inflation target band based upon any empirical data from India? Also, should inflation index like CPI or WPI include wider goods and services?
So the consumer price index, on which is being targeted, is the most widely used target if you look across all countries, why is the consumer price index used? Primarily because consumers can relate to it. One of the main objectives of inflation targeting is to anchor expectations. Now, people have expectations about the prices, the consumption bundle that they consume. And when we hold consumer expectation survey, then depending on, sometimes if food is a higher proportion of their basket, then they do talk about more food. But the consumer price index does include services as well. It is pretty good. In fact, my colleagues and I have an NIPFP working paper on it. And if you're interested in how good a representative basket it is, we've shown comparisons with the CapEx database. I'm so sorry, with the consumer pyramids database, which has household consumption baskets, and we pretty much find that it is a good representation. And that is the empirical reason for the basket or the measure, the CPI. Now, if you talk about what is the reason for the number, the 4%, and for the band. Now, the 4% target rate was chosen more or less. These are political decisions at the end of the day. But I think when the Urjit Patel committees proposed that, and when the RBI and the Ministry of Finance were looking at it, then what were they thinking? Primarily that you have advanced economies pretty much with a 2% rate. And we would be higher than that because we have, let's say, roughly a 2% productivity growth, which gives us a 4% rate. So that was broadly the thinking, that in international settings, if you are going to think of this is known as the Samuelson-Balassa theorem, but if you're going to think of long-term currencies being at par, then what you take into account is the inflation and their productivity growth. And if we do take the rupee as a rupee dollar rate, let's say, as something that would have long term stability, then that would be a 4% rate would be suitable for us. In terms of the band, I think we were being cautious that we find that when you begin this new framework, when this framework starts, an inflation targeting framework starts, it is very, very hard to achieve a particular rate. So usually have a band and then narrow the band and have a glide path, you move towards it. This sort of an approach gives people time to get used to the inflation rate and the inflation targeting regime. It is also based historically. I mean, if you look at the fluctuations that were there in the consumer price index in the past, then the fluctuations were not like 10% to 0%. And, they were not too high. So they roughly fitted this sort of a band. So that's the kind of logic that is used for a CPI target of 4 with a plus minus 2.
Uh, there is some connection between inflation rates and bank rates, or that is what Jitendra Tomar seems to be referring to. He says, shouldn't the inflation rate be around the interest rate of fixed deposits, which is around 8.5% today? I don't know which bank is giving 8.5% today, Jitendra Tomar. Please let us know. But I think it's around 6.5% these days, fixed deposit rates. But is there a connection, Neela?
So if you go back to let's start with the theory that if I'm given something today uh, versus if I'm given the same thing next year, then consumers typically would prefer a bit more next year than today. So if I tell you that I'll give you an app, you have a choice between an apple today and apple tomorrow, you'd prefer the apple today. Whereas if you had a choice between an apple today and say 1.5 apples tomorrow, then you might be indifferent between the two. In other words, if when people save, they would prefer that they get something a little more tomorrow compared to today. Now, that sort of preference over time of consumers is what leads to a positive real interest rate in most economies at most times, which means that the nominal interest rate, which is whatever he's saying, 6%, or you say 6%, he's saying 8%, should actually be a little higher than the inflation rate. So I get a positive real return. So if I'm thinking of buying an apple with it today, I should be able to buy more than just that one apple tomorrow. So in fact, it should not be equal. So I know I've given a long answer, but it should no, it should not be equal. The nominal interest rate should be a little higher than the inflation rate so that people get positive interest on their savings.
We will take one last question, Ila. We've actually come to the end of our show, but there is one. There are actually several questions which are not related to our topic, and we apologize to all our viewers. We will not be able to answer them because we have a limited amount of time. We can do this live show, but please do come back again, and we will take your questions the next time, especially if you're focused on the topic at discussion. Uh, Anmol Singhal is, it's a nice tricky question. Is high inflation how UPA government achieved higher growth between 2004 and 2014?
No, first of all, I'm not sure that what are you comparing with? The inflation in that period was high, but honestly, growth was not higher. I mean, we've had a lot of changes in GDP, this and that. Towards the end of the period, UPA period, growth had started slowing down. So that's just that correction. But no, I don't think that growth came because of high inflation. Growth came because of many reasons, including, there were the world economy at that time was on an upswing. So if you remember from the after the 2002 to 3 period, the entire Western world, including the US economy and many other economies, went into a upswing in the economy. Now that's upswing meant two things for us. First, it meant that our exports did very well. Second, in addition to exports, there were capital inflows. I think part of the growth story was also overheating, because when those capital flows came in and RBI was actually allowing credit to grow at very high rates, 2005 6, it was growing at above 30% per annum. There's huge amount of liquidity in the economy, lot of investment, particularly in infrastructure projects, which later we saw a lot of it actually get into trouble because it was overheating. So I would say the fact that the UPA did not have inflation targeting, did not control liquidity, did not put an emphasis on preventing that overheating, is got the economy into trouble, is what got the economy into trouble. So uh, allowing inflation to be high, for particularly, if you look at the period between 2003 to 2007, when there were very high capital inflows, up to 10% of GDP, very high credit growth, high investment, that then later led to the downturn that we see. So if they had done inflation targeting, I think the extent of downturn would have been dampened.
If the UPA government had done inflation targeting, the extent of downturn would have been much lesser. Thank you, Ela, for that very, very insightful half an hour. And I hope our viewers enjoyed it and got to learn something new today on inflation targeting. Thanks for watching. We will be back next week with another episode of IlaNomics. Please do subscribe and watch our other videos also. Thank you very much.